Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me. Thank you to Maria for organizing this workshop. And let me just say publicly, congratulations to Ainoa for successfully defending her dissertation. So it's been a wonderful experience to be here to participate in the defense, and it's a great pleasure to give this talk today. All right, so I'm going to be talking about what I call acts of address. So what is an act of address? As I will use the term, an act of address, these are acts of address are acts in which a speaker uses a linguistic expression, like a proper name, to get or maintain the attention of an addressee, often, but not always, because the addressee is the intended audience for some speech act that accompanies the act of address. All right, so vocative uses of proper names are paradigm cases of what I'm thinking about. So here are some examples. All my examples, by the way, are going to come from the British royal family. So I say, Charles, the guests have arrived. That use of the name, these are vocative uses of proper names. When I say Charles there, I am performing an act of address. I'm trying to get Charles's attention because I have something else that I want to say to him. The guests have arrived. So similarly, Camilla, where's the wine? There I ask Camilla a question. Or William, please close the gate. Act of address and then a request. Or Kate, I will pick up the kids. Act of address and a promise. All right, so acts of address often can accompany speech acts of many different kinds. We have an assertion, a question, a request, a promise. There can also be all sorts of speech acts. You can use acts of address for all sorts of speech acts. So here's a greeting, congratulations, an apology. This is an admonishment. Andrew, come on. Call that an admonishment, okay? So these are all cases where you perform an act of address because the addressee, there's something else you want to say to the addressee. But now there are also sort of pure cases of address where you address someone, you try to get their attention, but not because you have something else you want to say to them. You just get someone's attention. I call out to you, hey, Charles, just getting Charles's attention, all right? I'm going to use the word calls for that case. It's a special case of address, and that'll come up again later. Okay, so these are all examples of what I'm calling, uses of names in these examples are what I'm calling acts of address. Now it's important to notice that acts of address can be performed with lots of kinds of expressions. So you can do it with quantifiers. Okay, everyone, it's time to go. I say this in class almost every day. Okay, everyone, it's time to get started. And I'm addressing my students with the quantified noun phrase, everyone. Or someone near the back, please close the door. Acts of address using quantified NPs. Definite descriptions. These are actually, I had a harder time coming up with these examples, but you'll hear, paging the owner of a blue Honda Civic. Your lights are on. Act of address using a definite description. Here you have a possessive description. My king, I pledge my service, that sort of thing. Count nouns. Here's some examples using count nouns there. Runners, take your marks, and so on. There are terms of address. Things like sir, ma'am, madam, okay? Also, the second person pronoun, obviously. The word you is a term of address. We use you to address an addressee. And at least in English, you is the only pronoun that can be used for address. So, hey, she, what time is it, is no good. You cannot use any of the other pronouns for acts of address, at least in English, okay? I'm going to say more about you later on as well. Okay, so there are lots of expressions. Acts of address can be formed with lots of different kinds of expressions to keep I'm here though in this talk just to keep things contained. I'm going to focus on proper names. So acts of address using proper names. That's going to be the focus in this talk. All right. So I'm going to go on to say some things about names, but just here's something else. Here's a sort of preliminary I want to get out. For the purposes of this talk, let's individuate names in terms of their reference. All right, so let's say that there are two distinct names that are spelled the same and pronounced the same, but they're distinct names because they have different referents. There are two Harrys here. Prince Harry and the pop star Harry Styles. This is Harry Styles here. Okay, so let's individuate names that way, not this way. All right, that's just how I'm going to individuate names for the purposes of this talk. All right, so here's the plan. Here's what I'm going to do. The main argument of this talk is what I will argue is that acts of address are not acts of reference. When you address someone, you are not referring to the addressee. So what I'm going to argue is that there's a sharp distinction between acts of address and acts of reference. Okay? Acts of address do not in any sense contain an act of reference. They are very distinct acts that we perform distinct ways of, as it were, singling out, identifying, picking out individuals. Sharp distinction between acts of address and acts of reference. Okay. That's going to be the main conclusion of the talk. Now I'm going to go on to draw two consequences. I think that's important for a lot of reasons, but here I want to draw two consequences about names. The first is that the content of a name or the content of the use of a name cannot be an entity of any kind. In particular, it can't be an object, it can't be a referent, nor can it be a property. So there are predicativist views about names now on which the contents of names are properties, like person named Charles. The argument's going to apply to those views as much as it will to kind of direct reference views about names on which the content of a name is an object. None of those views can be right. Content of a name can't be an object or a property or an entity of any kind. Rather, the contents of names, uses of names, must be kinds of actions, types of actions. The content of a name is the kind of thing the speaker is doing with the name. Now, another consequence of that view is that names behave like indexicals. And that's true even if we individuate names in terms of their reference. Even if you individuate names that way, the content of a name is going to change from one context of use to another, not because there's a change in referent, but because there's a change in the kind of action that a speaker is using the name to perform. The difference isn't content argument, the difference is in actions that speakers are using the name to perform. And that makes names, it looks like names are behaving like indexicals. There's context sensitivity there in the name, even if there's no change in referent. Okay. All right. All right, so first though, but to get to that, I need to argue that acts of address are not acts of reference. So the distinction I'm drawing here, just to give you a feel for this distinction. So Charles, Liz, and Rishi have arrived. Act of address. These are acts of reference. I'm using those names to perform acts of reference. I've addressed Charles, I've referred to Liz, and I have referred to Rishi. Similarly here, Kate, is William playing polo this afternoon? I have addressed Kate, and I have referred to William. All right? That's the intuitive difference there. And what I'm going to argue is, I'm going to give an argument that those are distinct acts, very distinct acts that are performed there. There's no reference going on when I use the name Charles or the name Kate. All right. Here's the argument in a nutshell. And I'm going to be spending a lot of time like spelling this out, but here's how the argument goes. If an act of reference takes place, then it contributes to the subject matter of the speech act in which it occurs. Acts of address can occur without contributing to subject matter. So therefore, acts of address are not acts of reference. If reference occurs, it contributes to subject matter. Acts of address can occur without doing that. So the acts of address are not acts of reference. So the intuitive thought behind this argument is this. An act of reference fixes what you're talking about, fixes what your speech act is about. That's what I'm trying to get at with this notion of subject matter. An act of address determines who you're speaking to, and that's different than what you're speaking about. Okay? All right. So in fact, only one the there, sorry, typo. I'm going to spell out this notion of subject matter in some detail. So I'm going to try to say precisely what I mean by subject matter there. But the intuitive idea is subject matter is what the speech act is about in a broad sense. Okay. All right, so another preliminary distinction I need that I'm going to use is a distinction from speech act theory, the distinction between felicity conditions on a speech act and satisfaction conditions on a speech act. So these are two kinds of conditions that speech acts have. Speech acts have felicity conditions, and they sometimes have satisfaction conditions. So the felicity conditions on a speech act are conditions on the successful, non-defective performance of the speech act. Was the speech act performed successfully? Was it defective in some way or not? That's a question about felicity, whether the speech act is felicitous. Now, for some speech acts, there's a further question you can ask for some speech acts about whether they are satisfied or not. Okay? So, and satisfaction conditions come in different varieties for different kinds of speech acts. So for assertions, satisfaction conditions are truth conditions. An assertion can be true or false. All right, so on one hand, there's a question about whether an assertion is felicitous. Did it go off successfully? So let's suppose it did. Then in the case of assertions, we can then ask this further question, is it true or false? And that's to ask about the satisfaction conditions of the assertion. For questions, you get answerhood conditions. For orders and promises, you get fulfillment conditions. All right? But not every speech act has satisfaction conditions. Every speech act has felicity conditions, but not every speech act has satisfaction conditions. So a greeting, for example. A greeting can be successful, felicitous or not. I say hello. That might go off successfully or not. But it doesn't make sense to ask whether a greeting is true or false, or fulfilled or unfulfilled. The question of satisfaction just doesn't arise for a greeting. It has felicity conditions, but no satisfaction conditions. So here I've given some examples of felicity conditions for promising. Let me just take one of the sincerity condition on promising is that you intend to perform the action that you are promising that you will do. So if I promise to do A and I don't intend to do A, my promise is insincere. That's a failure of a felicity condition. My promise is infelicitous insofar as it's insincere. Okay, so that's a felicity question about felicity. The satisfaction conditions for promises are fulfillment conditions. Okay, I'm going to be using this distinction throughout this talk. Distinction between felicity conditions and satisfaction conditions. All right, so the way I want to start to argue that acts of address are not acts of reference is by comparing the felicity conditions on acts of address versus those for acts of reference. I want to look at one kind of felicity condition on address versus reference. So the question I want to ask is, and this is a question about felicity, what conditions must the addressee meet in order to be the target of a successful, non-defective act of address? What conditions must you meet in order for me to felicitously address you? That's the question I want to ask now. Let's call that addressability. What are the conditions on being addressable in a context? More specifically, being addressable by a speaker using a name in a context. What conditions must the addressee meet in order for felicitous address to occur? Okay? I'm going to try to answer that question about address, and then I'm going to answer the corresponding question about reference. What conditions must an object meet in order to be referred to in a context using a name? But let's start with address. All right, so I don't have my animations here, so don't look at this stuff yet. Okay, I'm going to talk through this, but here's my attempt at necessary. This is probably a mistake, strategic error, but I'm going to try to give necessary and sufficient conditions for addressability. I'm going to try to give an analysis of addressability here. Okay? So the target of analysis is A is addressable by S in a context C using a name N. Remember, we're just focusing on the use of names. If and only if, what? All right. So there are certain necessary conditions that I think are pretty obvious. So consider the following case. Suppose King Charles is on his throne in Buckingham Palace right now. Suppose he's sitting there in London on his throne. And here I am in San Sebastian in this room, and I say, Charles, the guests have arrived. Or Charles, let's go get a beer or something. Okay? He's there in London, I'm here in San Sebastian, and I try to address him from here in Spain. Not a felicitous act of address. That is not a successful act of address. And the problem is, he's too far away. There's no chance for him to hear me when I use his name to address him. So the address, that shows that the addressee has got to be like within earshot of the speaker. The addressee has got to be able to hear the speaker when the speaker attempts to address them. But now that condition can be met in a number of ways. So, you can address someone by holding up a sign with their name on it, right? And then the speaker needs to be able to see the sign. So that's a kind of visual contact. Maybe Charles and I are texting one another. I don't know if he does that, but anyway, suppose we're texting one another. Then I can address him through that electronic means of communication, all right? So the general thought here is that the addressee needs to be situated in such a way that they can receive the signal that I produce in my attempt at addressing them. Let's call that being within reach of the speaker. The addressee must be within reach of the speaker in C in order to be addressable in C. Okay, I think that's clearly a necessary condition on addressability, but that's not enough. So let's imagine that King Charles were here in this room with us today. Imagine he were there in the room with us. But suppose he's in a coma, God forbid. Suppose he's in a coma, or suppose he's deep asleep, or suppose he's deep in conversation with someone, right, and is fully occupied in that conversation, okay? So when I address him, if he's in a coma there, and I address him, not a successful act of address. He's not addressable in that case because he's not awake. He's unconscious. Okay, so the addressee needs to be within reach, but also conscious, awake, not completely distracted somehow. They can't have a virtual reality headset on or anything like that. All right, so let's call that being attentive in C. The addressee must be attentive in the context. Now, this condition, as I understand it, implies that consciousness is a condition on addressability. The addressee must be conscious. And a potential problem case, and I know, and Peter and I talked about this last night over drinks. Oh man, I hope my phone doesn't wake up when I say this. I sometimes say to my phone, hey Siri, my phone might make a noise when hey Siri, what time is it? Or hey Siri, where's the nearest restaurant? Or something like that, okay? And that swirly thing appears on your phone and then you get an answer. The phone will say, it's 4 o'clock or something. So you might think that's address. I've addressed my phone, I asked a question on my phone, but I don't think my phone is conscious. I don't think there's any app in there there's nothing conscious there that I have addressed. So if that is felicitous address, then it looks like consciousness is not a necessary condition on addressability. Now, but that's a big if. Is that felicitous address or not? I just want to bracket that. I'm inclined to say no, but I actually find it a little bit tricky to say exactly why not, to articulate exactly what the conversation with Peter and I know was very helpful about that. So I think there are things to say about that, but let's just bracket that. This may need to be a disjunctive condition. Okay, all right, so that's the second condition on addressability. That's not enough either. All right, so consider the next case. Here's another example that'll give us this third condition. So I live near the Mississippi River, and I walk my dog next to the river. There are woods along the riverbanks, and there is a coyote who lives in the woods where I walk my dog. And we run into this coyote, my dog and I run into this coyote quite often. I have given the coyote the name Coyote. I have dubbed it with the proper name Coyote. And when I see the coyote, I will say things like, Coyote, get lost, or Coyote, here we come, or Coyote, go away. And I'm trying to get, I want the coyote to get lost. I don't want the coyote to get in a fight with my dog. All right, so is that felicitous address? Have I successfully, the coyote hears me, the coyote's within reach, the coyote's awake, the coyote hears me, responds to my attempt at address, runs away. Is that felicitous address? I say no, that is not successful felicitous address. I could achieve the same effect by clapping my hands or making inarticulate noises, okay? I'm using the name to address the coyote, but the coyote is not responding to my use of its name. Compare that with when I talk to my dog. So my dog is named Arrow, like bow and arrow. And I say to my dog, Arrow, come over here, or Arrow, sit down, or Arrow, stop doing that. Usually it's Arrow, stop doing that. I do think that is felicitous address. I think I have successfully addressed my dog when I used my dog's name. Okay, so there's a difference there so what is the difference between the coyote and my dog? Intuitively, one wants to say, the difference is that my dog knows that his name is Arrow. He knows his name. The coyote does not know that his name is, it could be female. The coyote does not know that its name is Coyote. My dog is responding to its name, knows its name, and is responding to my attempts at addressing him using his name. So there's a kind of linguistic competence there that my dog has that the coyote does not have. It's not full of competence with English or any natural. My dog is not a competent speaker of English. So it's not linguistic or semantic competence. I call this condition being linguistically socialized with the name. Okay, and that entails that you know that your name is N, but it does not entail any substantial amount of linguistic competence. All right, that's what I'm trying to get at with that linguistic socialization condition. I use the word socialized there because I think if something is things that are addressable have been brought into a kind of social practice we have that is centered on acts of address. There's a certain human social practice which is linguistic in nature, which involves the ability to address one another using names and other kinds of linguistic expressions. And when my dog learns his name, he is brought into that social practice. He's been socialized into this practice of address. The coyote that has not happened with the coyote. I could potentially do that with the coyote, bring the coyote home, domesticate it, maybe make it my pet, and then the coyote would meet that condition. But the wild animal does not meet that condition. All right. We'd have to give, if we can felicitously address Siri, we're going to have to add some disjunctive condition here to handle Siri's case, but let's just bracket that as well. All right, so there's my analysis of addressability. It's usually a mistake to try to do this kind of thing in a room full of philosophers, okay? So maybe you have a counterexample to this, or maybe you think I've left something out, or one of these is not a necessary condition. Great, I want to hear your counterexamples. But I actually don't care whether I'm getting this exactly right or not. It doesn't matter to me so much whether I've gotten this exactly right, because the point is to contrast addressability with reference. All right, so we're going to turn now to reference, and we'll see that the conditions on reference are way more minimal than this. All right, and so even if this is not exactly right, the larger point stands that addressability and being referable to are quite different conditions. All right, so let's turn now to the corresponding question about reference. What conditions must an object meet in order to be referred to by a speaker using a name in a certain context? I think we can move a little bit quicker here. So the object must exist. And understand that timelessly to include the past, the present, maybe the future. I do not want to get sidetracked by issues about the metaphysics of time and the status of past or future objects. Well, we can talk about that in the Q&A, but I don't want to I don't want to go down that road. So this is just supposed to be the intuitive idea that you can't refer to something that doesn't exist. Okay? The object must be discernible. What that means is the object, there have to be some properties or relations that the object possesses that distinguish it from other similar objects. There are certain mathematical objects that fail to meet this condition. So there are two square roots of -1, I and -I. Those are the two square roots of -1. And it turns out that those two mathematical objects, I and -I, are indiscernible from one another. There are no mathematical properties or relations that distinguish them. And that's a problem about referring to either one of those square roots of -1. This is actually a problem for making sense of singular terms in complex analysis. When you introduce this name I, which square root of -1 are you referring to? There are papers about this. Philosophers of math worry about this. Okay? So that looks to me like a condition on reference. In order to refer to something, it has to be discernible. Finally, it's got to be that the name you use is a name of the object that you are attempting to refer to. So if I felicitously refer to you using a name, it's got to be that that name is your name, or you are named N. Okay? Now, you may remember, so there's this example. You remember the Smith-Jones example in Kripke's speaker reference, semantic reference? So the example, Smith is off in the distance raking leaves. I think it's Jones, and I say, Jones is raking leaves. And Kripke says, I've used the name Jones to refer to Smith. Speaker referred to Smith, okay? But Smith is not named Jones there, okay? So what I want to say about that case, so felicity means successful and non-defective, all right? In that case, I've succeeded in referring to Smith, but it is a defective act of reference. I've referred, but in a defective way, because I'm using a name for Smith that is not his name. So success and non-defectiveness can come apart. You can have successful but defective acts of reference. An insincere promise, by the way, is a successful but defective promise. All right, so I take that to be a necessary condition on felicitous reference. All right, so again, maybe I'll have something out, doesn't matter to me so much, but I think it's pretty clear that these conditions are much more minimal than they are than the conditions on address. All right, so that's a way of starting this argument that acts of address are not acts of reference. Look at their felicity conditions. They're very different. All right, objection to what I've said so far. If you think about it, anything that is addressable in a context will meet the conditions for being referred to in that context, right? If I can address something in a context, it's going to meet the conditions on reference, right? The set of things that are addressable is a subset of the things that can be referred to in a context. And that might lead you to think that inside every act of address, there is an act of reference. But then it's like reference plus some other stuff having to do with getting someone's attention, right? You refer, in addition, along with some extra stuff about addressing. But there's reference at the core of address. An active address is like an active reference plus some extra stuff about getting attention. Okay, so for all I've said so far, I have not ruled out that idea. That's still a live option now. All right, so I'm going to argue against that picture now. Okay, and to do so, I'm going to appeal to a certain kind of felicity condition that Searle calls the essential condition on speech acts. The essential condition on a speech act, it's a kind of felicity condition. It identifies the point or the purpose of the speech act. What is the purpose of making a promise? What is the point of making a promise? Well, it's to put the speaker under an obligation to perform a certain action. So that's the point of promising. The point of an order is to place the hearer under an obligation to do something. All right, and so, we could argue about what it is for assertions. But the thought is that there's a point or purpose for every speech act. It's a kind of felicity condition. If that condition is not met, if I perform a speech act and I fail to place myself under an obligation, then that is not a felicitous promise. Whatever I was doing, it's a failure as a promise if the essential condition is not met. Okay? All right. So let's compare now. Now what I want to ask, let's compare the essential conditions on address versus reference. What is the point or purpose of an active address? Well, I actually think I've already said what it is. The purpose of address is to get or maintain the attention of an addressee, often but not always, because you have something else you want to say to the addressee. You're trying to get someone's attention because you want to say something to them. All right. What is the point or purpose of reference? What is the purpose of acts of reference? Why do we refer to things? I think that's a harder question. And I think there's no simple answer to that question. And that's because reference is going to serve different purposes in different kinds of speech acts. The role of reference is going to vary from one kind of speech act to another. So here is one kind of purpose for reference. Acts of reference contribute to determining the satisfaction conditions of the speech acts in which they occur. So at least for assertions and truth conditions, this is the familiar idea that acts of reference help determine truth conditions. If I say Charles is in Scotland, my act of reference to Charles partly determines that that assertion is true if and only if it's Charles who is in Scotland. So acts of reference contribute to determining truth conditions for assertions. But generalizing that to other kinds of satisfaction conditions, acts of reference help determine, this is a request. Please give Charlotte a glass of water. I've referred to Charlotte, and that act of reference determines that the request is fulfilled if the addressee gives a glass of water to Charlotte and not to someone else. Let's talk about a question. The satisfaction conditions for questions are answerhood conditions. What that means is that when you ask a question, your question there are conditions on what counts as an answer to your question. So if I ask, where is William? What are the answers to that? Well, the answers have to specify William's location. Answerhood condition. An answer must specify William's location. So the active reference there helps determine those answerhood conditions. Okay, so one role for acts of reference is to help determine satisfaction conditions. That covers a lot of different kinds of speech acts. But there are speech acts that do not have satisfaction conditions. So here, consider this example. Suppose William says, poor Harry. He is expressing pity, say, to Harry when he says that. Now, first, that is not an active address. All right? That utterance could be perfectly felicitous, even if Harry is on the other side of the world. All right? Harry need not be within reach or attentive in order for that to be a felicitous act, speech act. So I think that's an act of reference. I think William is referring to Harry when he says, poor Harry, okay? But that expressive speech act, he's expressing pity. There are no satisfaction conditions there. There are no truth conditions, fulfillment conditions, answerhood conditions. So the role of reference there cannot be to help determine satisfaction conditions because there are no satisfaction conditions. So what is the act of reference doing there in that example? Well, what is it doing? It's identifying the object of the emotion that William is expressing. William is expressing pity for Harry. And the act of reference is identifying the object or target of the emotion that William expresses. Same thing going on here. Charles says, bloody Andrew. He's expressing anger or frustration with Andrew. The act of reference is identifying the object of his anger. Okay? So that's another role for acts of reference. They identify the objects or targets of our expressed emotions in expressive speech acts. Here's something else that acts of reference can do, though, in expressive speech acts. So suppose Andrew says, sorry for making Charles angry. And that's an apology. It's an expressive speech act. Okay? I think that's reference there. He is referring to Charles. But Charles is not. So let's suppose that Andrew says this to Camilla. So he's expressing remorse to Camilla, not to Charles. All right? So that's not the object of his remorse. It's not the target of the emotion that he is expressing. So what is that act of reference doing? Well, what is it doing? It's helping specify the reason for the emotion that he is expressing. Why Andrew feels remorse. Why? Because he made Charles angry. And that gerundive clause, making Charles angry, is serving to specify the reason for the remorse that he is expressing there in that speech act. So that's another thing that an act of reference can do. It can help specify the reason for the emotion that you are expressing in an expressive speech act. This example combines both of these functions. So many thanks to Andrew for making Charles angry. Suppose Camilla is happy that Charles is angry for some reason. Okay? That act of reference specifies the object of her gratitude. She's grateful to Andrew. And this act of reference is specifying the reason for her gratitude. She's grateful to Andrew because Andrew made Charles angry. So we have both of those functions there in that example. All right. Here's another purpose that acts of reference can serve. So here's another kind of speech act. It's a kind of speech act that Searle calls declarations. It's a category in Searle's theory. Paradigms of declarations are utterances like, I pronounce you man and wife, or I declare this, or I christen this ship the Britannia. And a declaration brings about a new institutional fact. Like, I bring it about that you are married, or I bring it about this new fact that the ship is named the Britannia. Okay? So declarations are these special kinds of speech acts where by making the speech act, you bring into existence a new state of affairs, a new fact that's usually connected to some surrounding institutions. All right? It's debatable about whether declarations have satisfaction conditions or not. But at least it's a live option to say that declarations don't have satisfaction conditions. They're not true or false. They're not fulfilled or unfulfilled. They're just there to bring these new facts into existence. They can be successful or not, but that's the only question one can ask about declarations. Okay, so what might be the role of reference in declarations? So take this case. William says, I name Harry the new captain of the polo team. Active reference to Harry. Well, clearly what it's doing there is the active reference is helping to determine the new fact that is brought into existence, namely that Harry is the new captain of the polo team. So that's another role for acts of reference. They can help determine the facts that are brought into existence by declarations. All right, so here we have 4 different purposes, functions, played by acts of reference. And I claim, and I may be going out on a limb here, I claim that these are exhaustive. all acts of reference serve one, maybe more of these purposes, but these are the roles or purposes for acts of reference across all speech acts. All right? Now, I want to try to motivate that exhaustiveness claim. So, if you look at sort of contemporary taxonomies of speech acts, more recent speech act taxonomies. So the one you get in Searle, the one you get in Bach and Harnish, their book on speech acts, the one you get in Alston's book on speech acts. If you look at the taxonomies given by these different philosophers, which use very different criteria of taxonomization, they're working in different frameworks, but these taxonomies, speech acts are grouped into these three broad categories. There are speech acts with satisfaction conditions, expressive speech acts, where a speaker is expressing an emotion or a feeling, and then there are these declaration kinds of speech acts that bring new facts into existence. All right, all of these taxonomies divide up speech acts into those categories, and the purposes that I just outlined cover all of those cases. Okay, so that makes me feel comfortable saying that these purposes are exhaustive. When we go, there's a sort of convergence of speech act taxonomies, and my list of purposes covers all the cases in those taxonomies. All right, so that's how I'm going to understand this notion of subject matter. What is it for an act of reference to contribute to subject matter? It fulfills one of those purposes, P1 through P4. That's what acts of reference do. They serve one of those roles that I just gave you, P1 through P4. So that's premise one of the argument, and that's what I mean by subject matter there. P1 through P4, that's determining subject matter. All right, so premise two, acts of address can occur without contributing to subject matter. To show that, I just need to give you some examples where acts of address are not doing any of those, serving any of those purposes, P1 through P4, and that's really easy to do. So let's take the example I started with. Charles, the guests have arrived. That is an assertion. The guests have arrived. And what are the truth conditions for that assertion? That the guests have arrived. The truth conditions depend on whether the guests have arrived. Charles does not figure in those truth conditions, right? The truth conditions have to do with where the guests are, not anything about Charles. So the act of address to Charles there is not contributing to the determination of the truth conditions of that utterance. The truth conditions have nothing to do with Charles. So there's an act of address there. It's not helping to determine satisfaction conditions. It's clearly not serving any of those other purposes, P2 through P4. So it is not contributing to subject matter in that case. Now this is an example of what I call, I'm borrowing some terminology from literature on vocatives here. This is what I'm calling extra-deictic address. The contrast here is with a case like this. Charles, Camilla told you that the guests have arrived. And you have a second person pronoun that is anaphorically linked in some sense to Charles. And there you might say that act of address, right, is linked to the use of you. You is deriving its reference from the addressee there. So there you might say the act of address is contributing to truth conditions because of its link to the use of that second person pronoun. Okay? Fine. Notice that the contribution is indirect because it's going through this link to the second person pronoun. Okay? Call that intradeictic address. Intradeictic address doesn't help my case. But that's okay, because there is extradeictic address, where the act of address is not serving, it's not contributing to subject matter in any way. All right, another example are what I earlier called calls. So I just say, hey, Charles, or oi, Harry, just trying to get their attention. No satisfaction conditions. I'm not expressing an emotion. It's not a declaration. So none of the purposes P1 through P4 are involved there. So it's not contributing, there's no contribution to subject matter in those cases. So that's not an act of reference. right? It's addressed. There is no subject matter in the calls case. I'm just trying to get someone's attention. All right, I think I'm going to skip this for the sake of time. And I can come back to this in case a question comes up. All right, so the premise was acts of address can occur without contributing to subject matter. I've given you two kinds of examples, extra-deictic address and calls, to illustrate that. Now, I think what holds for those cases ought to hold for all cases of address. If I can show that address is not reference in some cases, I think we have to generalize to all cases of address. Address is never reference, right? Address and reference are two distinct ways of identifying or picking out an individual. You can refer to something or you can address it. Those are distinct, but on all fours with one another. Okay? So in intradeictic cases, I address someone, and then I make that addressee available to be the referent of a later active reference. But I have not referred to the addressee. There, I've addressed them, singled them out in a different way. Okay? These are two different ways of picking out individuals, addressing and referring. All right. I'll come back to I'm going to skip this too for the sake of time. But this is more about you. You is a special case and kind of interesting, actually. So there it is, but I'll come back to you if you're interested in talking about the second person pronoun. All right, let's get on to names. All right, so, and this actually won't take very long, but so now I'm going to use this distinction between address and reference to draw a conclusion about the contents of names. Contents of names can't be objects or properties. They have to be types of actions. All right, so first let's back up though, and let's ask, what are we talking about when we ask what is the content of a name? What are contents? What is content? What is this debate about? What is the question? I ask, what is the content of a name? What am I asking about? All right, well, one familiar role for the notion of content is that the content of a speech act determines, along with its force, the content of a speech act determines the satisfaction conditions of the speech act, right? Usually people just think about truth conditions. Content determines truth conditions. The proposition expressed determines the truth conditions of the speech act. But more generally, content determines satisfaction conditions. So here we have two utterances. I have COVID by Harry, I have COVID by Kate. They have different truth conditions there, so they must have different contents, because content determines satisfaction conditions, so we can conclude that those two uses of I have different contents. All right? That's a style of argument you see all over the place in philosophy of language, using differences in truth value or differences in truth conditions to conclude that there's a difference in content. And that style of argument is trading on this notion of content. Content determines satisfaction conditions. All right? The problem is that that notion of content is pretty narrow. It only applies to speech acts with satisfaction conditions. So a speech act like sorry, Kate, which does not have satisfaction conditions, looks like it doesn't have content on this way of understanding content. If the job of content is to deliver or determine satisfaction conditions, and this utterance has content, we would expect it to have satisfaction conditions, but it doesn't. So it looks like it doesn't have content. And that's an uncomfortable thing to say, that there's no content to the speech act, sorry, Kate. Same thing to say about extra-deictic address. This use of Charles, right, makes no contribution to the truth conditions of that assertion, right? If it had content, you would expect, where content is understood as a determiner of satisfaction conditions, you would expect that use of the name to make some contribution to truth conditions, but it doesn't do that. And that will lead us to say that that use of the name has no content. And that sounds weird. It's meaningful use of language, but it lacks content. This notion of content is too narrow to handle non-satisfaction conditional speech acts and acts of address. It's just too narrow a notion of content. All right, but that's okay because, I'm gonna skip that too. I can come back to that in the Q&A. That's okay, because there's another familiar notion of content that extends in a very smooth and natural way to non-satisfaction conditional cases. Another way of understanding content is that the content of a speech act is what the speaker said. I mean, this alternative, it belongs to the theory of communication, right? The content of a speech act is what the speaker says, and it's what the hearer grasps or understands on the basis of hearing that utterance. Content is what is communicated in successful communication, all right? Now, so there's no tie there to satisfaction conditions. Content is what the hearer grasps or understands, what the competent hearer grasps or understands. So that notion of content delivers the same result here. Any competent hearer will grasp different things on the basis of those utterances, so we're going to get the same result, that these uses of I have different contents. Not because of difference in truth conditions, but just because a hearer grasps or understands different things on the basis of those utterances. All right, on that notion of content, there's no problem at all about saying that, say, vocative uses of names have content. Hearers grasp, when you address a hearer, they grasp, so they understand your speech act, right? Competent hearers understand when they are being addressed. They grasp that you are addressing them. So there is content there on this notion of content, but notice that there's going to be a difference in what a hearer grasps. There's going to be a difference in what a hearer grasps between an active address and an active reference, right? William is going to be able to is going to know the difference between being addressed and being referred to. William can tell the difference, knows when he's being addressed and when he's being referred to. He grasps different things, all right? So on this notion of content, there is a difference in content between those two uses of William, because the competent speaker grasps different things there. And that means that the content of the uses of those names can't be William himself, because William is shared, right, across those two uses. William is the addressee and the referent. William is the same, so it can't be that the content of those uses is William, because there's a difference in content there, which we lose if we say that the person is the content of those uses of the name. Same thing for a property like person called William. We can talk about that in the Q&A if you're a predicativist about names. All right, so I'm proposal. The contents of the uses of names are acts themselves. They're types of actions. The content of this use of the name William is a type of act of addressing William. We build into the content the kind of act that the speaker performs. The content of that use of the name William is a type of act of referring to William. The kind of act is built into its content. And so that gives us a difference in content between those two uses. We're almost done. And that means that names behave like indexicals. Content of the name is going to change from one context of use to another, not because the reference changes, but because the kind of act the speaker is using the name to perform changes. In one context, it's an active address. In another context, it's an active reference. That I claim is a difference in content, and that means that the name itself, even individuated in terms of its referent, the content of the name will change from one context of use to another. What a hearer grasps on the basis of the use of that name is going to change from one context of use to another. Okay? Now remember, well, this is the last thing I'll say, address can be performed with lots of expressions. Quantifiers, definite descriptions, count nouns, terms of address, second person pronoun. So this is not just, all of the conclusions I've given here are going to extend to those sorts of expressions. It's going to be pervasive. We're going to get the sort of conclusions about content are going to spread to lots and lots of kinds of expressions. All right, that's it. Thank you very much.
So, okay. So, eros kepa pitipagina no.
It's very lively talk, and I would like to know whether you can be successful in an act of address in using grunt name. For instance, in a face-to-face conversation,
Yeah.
I can say, hey John, let's go to have a beer, and so on and so forth. If it works like, it may work like an indexical, but in this particular case.
Yeah, so here's what I want to say. I might try to address you. Suppose I try to address Peter using the name John. I say, John, let's go get a beer. That is an infelicitous act of address. Felicity, though, remember, is a matter of being successful and non-defective. So I want to say it's successful there, assuming I get Peter's attention. I have succeeded in getting Peter's attention, but it is a defective act of address because I have used a name that is not his name. This is analogous to the Smith-Jones example, right? Same thing. Yeah. So it's infelicitous, it's successful, but still infelicitous because it is defective. Yeah.
There are, how would you consider, for instance, the use of you, for instance, in Dante's famous, I don't know how it has been translated into English, lasciatemi speranza voi che entrate. Leave any hope you who enter.
Yeah, good.
In this kind of case, it's an act.
Good. So, yes. So there are kinds of uses of you. They're called the impersonal you, where we use you to make a kind of generalization. We say, like, abandon all hope, all ye who enter here. That's an impersonal use of you. Okay? That's a special kind of use of you. That's not the use of you for address. So I need to set that. I don't know what to say about that's a special case, but not address there. In that case.
It would not be an act of address.
Not an act of address there. The impersonal use of you is not an act of address. Yeah. Good question. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Enjoyed it very much. But there are many things I agree and lots of things I disagree. I don't know what. I go to the things I disagree.
Okay. Go there.
Well, no, I agree that there are different kinds of acts. Acts of reference and acts of address. That's clear. And some of the reasons you gave, I think there are good reasons, I agree totally. Some of them, for instance, you said that you didn't give much importance to the details on these 1, 2, 3, of addressability and referability on these conditions. I have some questions whether it would have been clearer to distinguish the conditions to pertain to just being, they were necessary for success, speech act, or successful addressability from non-defective, right? I have some doubts about those, like, think I would be like, in the case of addressability, well, I was just thinking, well, it is necessary that, in fact, A is within reach of S, or just that the speaker believes that the one is in reach, I don't know. Or is it in fact necessary that, that the addressee is attentive, or just you must, get them attentive by addressing them, So maybe it's not a necessary condition. Okay. And then you can have like successful address, but the word defective. I don't know. And the same thing for reference, right? You can have successful reference, but failed, or defective and things like that.
Yeah, very good. Excellent question. So just to be clear, I am not attempting to give a full account of the felicity conditions on address here. What I'm trying to do here is just to clarify one kind of felicity condition on address that has to do with what the addressee must be like. Now, there are other conditions on the speaker, right? Conditions the speaker must meet in order for the speaker to make a felicitous act of address. I haven't tried to say what those are at all. I'm just focused on what conditions the addressee must meet, and that's just one piece of the larger set of felicity conditions on address. Okay? But now, so it's sort of modest here. I'm not trying to give a full dress account of felicity on address or reference. But I do think, so you asked about like success versus defectiveness. I do think, and maybe I should have said this, I think if you look at failures of these two conditions are going to lead to failures of success, right? If the addressee is not within reach and they're not attentive, address fails. You failed to get their attention. Failures of this kind are going to be defective cases of address, right? You might successfully get their attention, but it's defective because it's not their name you're using. Something like that. So,
are we not mixing conditions of success with conditions of satisfaction? I mean,
no,
if the addressee is not awake, I would say you made a successful act of address, but it was not satisfied.
Strongly
He didn't awake. He didn't hear.
Yeah.
It was too far away.
Strongly disagree with you about that, right? There are no satisfaction conditions on acts of address. There are only felicity conditions, only success and non-defectiveness conditions, right? Right? It's not, acts of address are not like assertions or orders where we can say the act was successful, the promise went off, the assertion went off. Now there's this further question we can ask about whether it's true or fulfilled. You can't do that with address. If it's successful, you got their attention. That is the point of an act of address, to get someone's attention. And if you succeed in doing that, then you did get their attention, and there's no further question to be asked about satisfaction there. Yes. That is crucial to what I'm arguing here. Yeah. Yeah.
So, okay. Now, I think you had a suggestion. How would I put it, your last one? I accept that addressing and referring are different kinds of acts.
Yeah.
They separate. Okay. I agree with you, P1, 2, P4, but why not summarize that like, well, in the act of referring, the name contributes an object to the satisfaction conditions or the truth conditions or all the propositional contents, if you want. Yes, I miss the word object. What's the contributes to, but you don't say contributes with what. And I think it would be just naturally, and speaking, I would say an object. In all those cases, singular terms usually contribute an object, and then it's going to be a predication or a question or something else. When you said subject matter, I would be happy to say truth conditions, and then use object for the contribution that the name does, or the act of referring does. It's just giving you an object.
Part of the reason why.
I think that's another strong point of disagreement. I'm happy to say that the content of the proper name is an object.
Yeah, no, that's not
different roles. Because the object is there in the acts of address. The object is there, but it performs another role that performs in the. So why not? What's the argument for that?
I just gave you the argument. So one of the reasons why, I'm kind of trying to engage with, there's a debate about proper names between what you might call referentialists about names and predicativists about names. The predicativists say that the content of the name is a property, predicate style semantic value there. So I'm trying to sort of like, I want to address both of those views. So that's why I don't just say the name contributes an object, because there are these other views on which names contribute properties. So that's sort of why I put it the way I did. Okay, so let me give you the argument again in a nutshell. Acts of address are different from acts of reference. All right? That means that there is a difference in content. There is a difference in what a hearer grasps when a speaker uses a name for address as opposed to using a name for reference. The speaker understands different things there. And that means there cannot be a shared, there's a difference in content between those two kinds of uses of names, right? If we say the content of the name is always just the object, we cannot distinguish the contents of the uses of those names. Yeah. Now, you might want to say the content of the use, in acts of reference, the content is an object. In acts of address, it's something else. Some other thing. It can't be the same thing. It can't be the same object. It's something else, right? Now, I want to know what that other thing is. Yeah.
I guess the disagreement can be put in this way. I mean, you are putting the force, the kind of act that the utterance is, the type of act that is, the utterance is, the kind of a speech act. You are putting that information within the content.
Exactly right.
And Cyril doesn't do that.
Nope. He hates that.
Austin doesn't do that. Okay, so again, maybe we agree, but we are using terms in different ways, because I would say, okay, if you include the difference in, difference in of recognition of the kind of act has to be tracked down to difference in content, then of course. If you define content like that, then you have an argument. But you say, no, you have propositional content or satisfaction conditions, or there are speech acts with no, we agree, there is no propositional content, but there is an object there, like in the address case, you can say, I would say that in the case of addressing, you have an object there, and that's what then you have, that's why you have intra-basic reference, right? Because the object is available there in context. Not to be part of the satisfaction condition, I agree. But, so I think we...
So, thank you for the question. I wrote a whole book arguing against the distinction between content and force at the level of whole propositional contents. I think there is no intelligible notion of content that is separate from notions of force. I think that there is no coherent notion of content you can get without using notions of force. And part of what I'm doing here, so that's a point about propositions, whole propositions. Sort of what I'm doing here is kind of making the same point about the contents, sub-propositional contents. Sub-propositional contents can't be understood independently of. They carry information about the kind of act that the speaker is performing.
So, Peter Brain?
Thank you. Great talk. You're very challenging. So, let me ask you this question. Since although you focused on proper names here as what was used in active address, you include all these other context expressions. And in many of these cases, these context expressions contain proper names. Like the guy next to the statue of Stalin. Turn on the light. Everyone who was at Maria's party yesterday, raise a hand or something. Now, what do these proper names do in these complex expressions when they're used as acts of address? They are not...
That's reference.
That's reference. That means that your list is not complete, because they're contributing to determining the addressee, which is not on your list.
Great question, Peter. They're contributing. I haven't thought about this. I don't know what to say. That's a great example. I don't know what to say to that. But it sounds like you've given me another thing I need to add to the list. And how much of a problem is that?
Well,
I want to say the whole noun phrase, even if there's a name inside of it, the whole noun phrase is being used to perform an act of address. Right? And it might be that an act of reference goes into that to determine what act of address is being performed. But I think you're right. That does give me another function for acts of reference. And I don't on the spot know how to handle that. So yes, great question.
So let me just follow up.
Yeah.
Someone could take that concession on your part as a basis for further suggestion. If you want uniformity here, that names can contribute to addressing by means of reference, why only when embedded? You can't get a more uniform theory if they do it also when non-embedded. So, the guy to the right of Charles, call me up, or Charles, call me up. Why not say that Charles does the same thing? And you add something more, some addressing on top of the reference, whether it's embedded in a bigger, larger expression or not, that would make the theory more uniform. So that's a follow-up question.
So the thought would be an active reference can help determine the addressee, can contribute to determining who you are addressing.
Yeah.
That can happen, right? In sort of compositional cases.
Yeah.
If that can happen, why not say that that happens when it's a simple like bare use of the name to perform an active address? Yeah. Wow, Peter, that is a great question. I need to think through how it is that an active reference helps contribute to determining who is what the active address, right? And it might be that an active address can only do that alongside, in cooperation with other expressions, right? I need to think that I haven't worked this out, and I'm making this up on the spot now. But it might turn out that an active reference can only help fix an active address in a compositional way along with other expressions, like as being part of a larger quantifier phrase, right? If that's so, then that would block this inference from,
It would, but it would require
more
for motivation.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So that's work I need to do.
Okay. I have one more question, but I can wait until others.
Okay, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4 more, so then Peter, so now we have 5. So I know.
Yes, this was great, but I want to ask you about, you said that acts of address behave like indexicals? Names
behave like indexicals.
Behave like indexicals. So what about acts of address that include names, like Charles drinking the wine, or another example? So going back to propositions, to your own theory of propositions, if you think about pure indexicals, like I think there are things that, let me know what you think about this. There are things that happen with propositions that include I that do not happen with propositions that include like propositions including acts of reference or acts of address, like you said, that include proper names. For example, according to your theory, a proposition including the first person pronoun is unrepeatable, it's a one side with only one token. But with a proposition with a constituent that is a name used for an active address, it seems that anyone can perform that. That is not unrepeatable at all. Maybe the boundary proposition of which that name is a constituent, maybe if you say that part of what it means to be an active address is I do not remember because it was at the very beginning, but something about the function of that active address. Maybe the larger proposition might be unrepeatable because that intention or that function might not be the same anymore, exactly the same, but that constituent, that it seems to me that is completely available for anyone to perform.
Sure, agreed. Agreed. Can I answer that question?
Yes, I would. There was no
Yeah.
A question, it was, well, yes, it's a question, but
Yeah.
Am I right or not?
Yeah, no, so I want to say, suppose Camilla and Kate are there. Camilla says, Charles, where's the wine? And Kate says, Charles, she wouldn't do that, because Charles, the guests have arrived. Same content. There's type of active addressing Charles there, and there's same content there to those acts of address. So it's repeatable in my sense. So when I say the names behave like indexicals, I mean something I just mean that there are changes in content to the use of a name from one context of use to another, even if we individuate names in terms of their reference. So there are changes in the contents of the uses of a name that are not differences in the referent. That's all I mean when I say names behave like indexicals. There are features of indexicals in the way I handle them, like non-repeatability, that you're not going to get with acts of address. So I mean something fairly narrow when I say that names behave like indexicals. Yeah. Yes.
Eros, I think you have another question?
No, I pass.
Okay, so Josu.
No, what do you
No, it's okay.
Okay, thank you. I was thinking, I don't know if it's related to Peter's question, a classroom full of students, 2 or 3 are called Josu, one of them is doing something very bad, and the teacher says, Josu! Just Josu. The teacher gets the attention of all Josus, but only the one who is doing the wrong thing knows that he's being addressed. And the others think the teacher is not referring to me. It's not just, it's like,
It's not addressing me, but yeah.
Addressing me, but I don't know. I don't know. It's not a question,
Oh,
but
so,
I don't know how to think about this case.
so is the question supposed to be that this sounds like the intuitive thing to say? The other students realize that the teacher is not referring to them, and you're using referring there deliberately.
Yep.
Yeah. So the other students are thinking, the teacher's not referring to me, so there must have been reference there on the part of the teacher.
Or maybe
That's
both
the
things, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't put a lot of dialectical weight on that. Maybe that's what they think, but I mean, it's equally reasonable for them to say, the teacher's not talking to me. The teacher's not talking to me. They're talking to that guy, right? And talking to someone is a matter of addressing them. So they're thinking I'm not being addressed by this. Yeah. Yeah, but good case. It's a good case.
Joanna?
Yeah, thank you for the talk. So I think I have a very, a tiny question, so maybe it's just a detail. So I had some worries about the conditions you listed all for the addressability and also for reference. I guess Kepa covered my issues with addressability because I share the intuition that maybe the condition shouldn't be about how A should be, but about what the speaker believes that that A is. I share the intuition, I guess, with Kepa, but maybe that was already covered. But with the conditions on reference, I was wondering, I was thinking that the first one was quite, I don't know if controversial, but maybe the formulation should be, was problematic because we do refer to things that do not exist, like fictional entities and this sort of thing. And so I was thinking how this could be formulated, but then I thought, oh, why do we need it? So do we need the first condition there in the list? Maybe O is discernible and N is an info, and that's... So you said, you told us that it was like a minimum list, but maybe it's not minimum enough, or I don't know.
I mean, dialectically speaking, you're right. I kind of don't need this condition. I mean, I actually think that's right, though. So I think you can't, I think sorts of case I have in mind here are when you say, like, that belongs to me, and there's just nothing there at all that could be the target of my demonstration. So that is not a felicitous active address, or excuse me, a reference. That is not success. There's nothing there for me to refer to.
But we are talking about names. That would be an example, but that is not a name.
True, yes.
If you have a name, it doesn't matter if it exists or not, the object. Because the case is very...
There's a can of worms about fictional entities that is opening here,
yeah, I know.
right? So there are no kind of uncontroversial things that one can say about that. So it would be stepping into a minefield if I got into that. But I don't know. Let me put it like this. Here, I'll plant a flag for this claim. If we can refer to fictional entities using names, then they exist. I'll say that much. Okay, let me go back to your first question, though. So I think you're right. So in a way, I agree with you. There are interesting and important felicity conditions on address that apply to the speaker. The speaker needs to meet certain conditions in order to felicitously address someone. I didn't actually say anything about what those conditions are. Maybe the speaker has to believe that the addressee is awake. Okay? That's a kind of felicity condition on address that yes, sure. Yeah, I haven't, but it's like, there are going to be lots more felicity conditions on address that I just didn't give you. I'm trying to give you one kind of felicity condition on address that applies to the addressee.
Yeah.
Yes.
I guess my intuition was, and I may be wrong, of course, but that it's not that we needed like more conditions on the speaker, but that the conditions you gave us were replaceable. So should be put or formulated in terms of the speakers later.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I'm following a kind of, I mean, I'm picking up on a pattern one finds in speech act theory. So often felicity conditions, first kind of speech act, there are certain felicity conditions that apply to the speaker. And then there are other kinds of felicity conditions that apply to the hearer. So for example, for an order, right? The speaker, in order to make a felicitous order, the speaker needs to be in a position of authority of some kind in order to give the order. That's a felicity condition that applies to the speaker. Here's a felicity condition on the hearer. The hearer must be capable of performing the action that they are ordered to do. Right? It's got to be possible for the hearer to carry out. So if I order you to jump over Buckingham Palace, that's an infelicitous order because you are not capable of doing that. I mean, maybe you are. Okay, so one finds it in analyses. Sometimes the felicity conditions apply to the speaker, sometimes they hear to the hearer, and I'm going right to the addressee here. Yeah.
Peter and Pepper.
No, not another one from Peter.
Yeah.
So here's another one. So this is related to the last part of your previous exchange with Kepa when the question of force came in. So in your last argument, when you are making conclusions about the contents of a name, you are reasoning from, that is how it seemed to me, from differences in contents of uses of names between referring and addressing, the differences in the contents of the name.
May I interrupt? Go ahead.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Well, okay. So it seemed to me that that is not immediately a correct inference, because you could say, yes, there are these differences in the usages, or the content of uses, but there need not be a difference in the semantics or the content of name, because the uses might be differently related to that content. So we can't immediately draw conclusions about what the content of the expression is.
Yeah, I intended to draw no conclusions about the content of the name itself, or the semantic content of the name in the language, or anything like that.
Okay.
No, if I'm sure I probably said things that sounded like I was doing that, and I was speaking loosely, sloppily. No, I'm only trying to draw conclusions about the contents of uses of names.
All right.
Yeah, that's all I need. So to extend that, I would have to take on some serious heavy-duty commitments. Yeah, in order to draw inferences. I mean, I get involved in very difficult debates if I move beyond that, and I'm not prepared to do that. So this is only about the contents of uses of names. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
But it sounded like you were talking about, well, what is the content of the name?
I'm sure I said that.
Okay.
I'm sure I said that, and I was being sloppy when I said that.
Point there.
Yeah.
No, well, that was exactly my question.
Okay.
Whether the content of the name changed when used as for reference or used to, I understood that. So I have another one.
I mean, let me say one more thing. I mean, I'm inclined towards a sort of character content view about names. There's a stable meaning to the name. Individuate the name in terms of reference, you get a meaning to the name that's shared across uses. But put it in a context of use, and now you get a type of action involved. And what that character is, function from context to types of actions, something like that. But again, I mean, maybe, I don't know, it's like, maybe linguistic expressions in the public language don't have content at all. Maybe it's only uses that have content, right? I kind of want to stay out of that debate there. See what I mean? Sorry, but go ahead.
No, yeah, so the question was that about, initially you said, well, you want to individuate names by the reference. I mean, syntactically, semantically. Why? I mean, that was necessary. I didn't see anything that hangs from there. I mean, you could have, like, you know, something like you have one name and there, well, you have something like basically in context, you know, in each use, you're going to have one single reference. So I know that Camilla, for instance, yes,
he does.
Individuals, he does that, right?
Yeah.
But in your case, I didn't see why.
Well,
and by the way, Camilla, I think Perry says that Kaplan said, but then we didn't find it written anyway. But
it's
something like Kaplan said, like proper names are a nightmare for semantics, but very useful to call kids to dinner or something like that. So you know, something like So something like the primary function or most useful function would be to address.
Oh wow, I don't know.
That would be a beautiful quotation for you.
Yeah, if you find that in Kaplan, let me know.
It was probably conversational talk or verbal.
Okay.
No,
I mean, one of the reasons I want to individuate the names in the way that I do, I actually think, you know, we can individuate names any way we want. Let's just pick one and go with it, you know. So part of it is if we individuate names not in terms of preference. So there's one name, Harry, that has multiple reference, or maybe it's ambiguous or something. It's kind of uninteresting to me to say that it behaves like an indexical, that it changes its content from one context to another. Because clearly, right, Harry sometimes is used to refer to that guy and sometimes used to refer to this guy. So it's sort of, it seems, just struck me, it's uninteresting to, if you individuate names without reference, then yeah, they behave like indexicals. So it strikes me as just more interesting. It's a more provocative claim if you individuate names in terms of reference. And, you know, Kaplan, in that section in demonstratives on proper names, Kaplan says, right, individuate names this way, and they are not indexicals.
Yeah.
And
Right?
I read also the most of this, but well, that would be another question. But I will read your book about non-repeatable indexical uses, which you mentioned.
Yeah.
I found it very.
There's a lot.
Very fragrant.
It's a sort of.
Thoughts or something like
That's a whole nother talk or a week of talks. So yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think we can leave it at here. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.